Thank you. Since we've been talking about how many minutes and all that, so I'll try and earn some points in the chair by being as short as possible. But before I start, one does have to record one's thanks to the ADRI and its wonderful team for the work they have done, and especially the warm hospitality for everything that they've done. Having said that, see, what I'm going to do is, this is a part of what I'm going to talk is a slice of a large amount of work we have done in Jharkhand, Bihar on the question of nationalism. And I would presume that this audience needs no introduction for nationalism. There are patterns and details which can talk till the cows come home. I'll not go to that because I'm sure all of you know what patterns are like, what problems are like. So I'm going to offer the other end to basically ask a simple question. If we were to believe the standard theorization of social science, the Indian state is a strong state, how the hell does nationalism survive? I mean, it should be easy to trust that. Now, if that is not true, if the Indian state is not strong, it's only a thesis, then what do you do about nationalism and how do you understand nationalism? My argument would be that you understand nationalism in terms of reinforcing patterns which they create together, the state and nationals and other actors and so on and so forth, to be able to make sense of this particular phenomenon called nationalism. And nationalism, I'll perhaps quote a few examples as I go along, but I'll not go into too much empirical detail, which I'm happy to take up in the question and answer session, and hopefully I'll see some time for that for myself. Let's start with this very simple proposition that if you read mainstream literature on governance, conflict is something you want to avoid. It's not something worth bothering with. If conflict exists, the literature seems to be saying that this is something which can be resolved using technocratic tools. You have to find the policy mechanism to address this question of conflict, so it disappears. Now, this presumption is located in a premise that it is possible to think of democratic government without conflict. My first assertion is, it's complete nonsense. There is no possibility of democratic governance without conflict. The question is, how do you study conflict? How do you manage conflicts? If conflicts will disappear, there is no democracy left. There is no possibility of emancipation of any kind, because sometimes conflict will spill over into violence. Because of which I would argue, conflicts need, and this is developing from J.D. McAdam, to say that conflicts need to be seen on a continuum, from assertion, dharna, band, whatever it might be, to the other continuum being a transgressive contention, as McAdam and others call them. It basically means that we are to violence to contest the monopoly of state violence. Now, if that is the location, that's a large continuum in looking at conflict, why and how conflicts get located in a continuum is something we have to think about. And my argument is that that location is actually a function of a whole complex series of processes of actors, institutions, which define where this conflict fit in. Now, why is this important? Naxalism is not always continuous warfare, is it? You don't have continuous, it's not that Naxals are going killing people 20 people a day and expect every day. It's still a killing or violence is still a rare phenomenon relatively. It's not as there's a backfish battle going on every day between Naxals. Why do they use conflict at particular points of time? Why do you use violence to blow a bridge or two? It's something which is defined contextually. There's nothing inherent in nationalism as a phenomenon or to seen as the extreme of violence as it's often constructed. Now, in this kind of background, what I'm going to suggest is the fundamental logic of governance in Bihar and Jharkhand is defined by two ideas. And I'm going to develop these two ideas and then shut up and leave it to all of you to grill me on that. The two ideas are a judicious veto and second one being a governmental participation. It's these two ideas will define the fundamental logic of governing in Jharkhand and Bihar, and this is not something new. These ideas have been around for a very long time. It's just that they have not been seen so in the literature. And I can defend that an argument that this idea is at least 200 years old, if not older. Now, these two ideas are not as if they are crafted onto the area. These two ideas are structured by the pre-existing social hierarchies, social processes, which give these ideas a particular meaning in these parts. Because these ideas arguably can be applied anywhere in the world. a judicious veto and a governmentally passed participation. But this, what is the particular thing which comes up in Indian context and how is applied to Jharkhand is the contextual variable which I'll try to talk about. Now, these two ideas are actually given meaning in the Indian context by the state itself, by having the self-proclaimed role which it plays in all these areas. First and foremost, and I can cite some documents on that. First and foremost, state wants to provide security. That's the first role. The state says so much in many documents. Many documents it says that our first role is to provide security, and second role is to provide socio-economic change. Shortcut you can use, say, security and development. There are two self-proclaimed goals. How does state board provide that? To be able to provide those benefits to the population, it has to first construct this category about who is the object of security, who is the object of development. This is a role which state performs itself by defining what I have called policy categories. The Naxals are objects of security discourse in the state. Others could be objects of a particular kind of politics of politics of development. Now, when states define these categories, what happens is that these categories themselves acquire constitutive power themselves. And this constitutive power actually obliges all actors in the area, whether in a contesting role or a complying role. To put very briefly, whether Naxals or the collateral state, they're all governed by these logic of the categories. These categories become self-constituting, logic of self. It obliges the state itself to adopt these categories and comply with that. It obliges the Naxals to comply with the categories. It also obliges the collaborative state to comply with categories. Now these categories therefore become the main logic of defining. Let's give you a simple example. State uses the category of security and development. Naxals have to therefore contest the state on the category of security and development both. So Naxals can then mobilize the idea of security by challenging the state on that count, by blowing up strategically exercising violence in a particular area. This strategic exercise of violence becomes important because this allows Naxals to exercise a judicious veto on the activity of the state. State, on the other hand, arms up and boxes Naxals down into a particular area. That's a veto exercised by the state on the activity. Now, none of the two actors, the state and Naxals in this case, have sufficient strengths really to be able to determine final outcomes. The state cannot rule out Naxals for reasons I'll come to in a couple of moments, and the vice versa. The Naxals don't have the strength to be able to throw out the state of a particular area, because of which they're constantly locked into a low-level equilibrium of conflict, and this becomes the defining feature of the conflict in Jharkhand and Bihar. Now, two more points here before the next one, and which is that the Naxals also exercise a veto on the state's functioning by committing the state to its own category of security. So, if there's a bridge blown up or a school attacked, or a few killings which happen here and there, it requires the state to follow its own category of security by deploying more forces, by getting more money being diverted from development activities to arming the police force, getting new vehicles, what have you, right? So money which could have gone to the state's other project of development, and states first says as much. Naxalism is a product of state's own capacities in so many ways. It cannot be very much about its own self-defined category of providing security, for which requires money, which is police forces, and arms and ammunition and violence and what have you, and therefore states are committed to its own category. So that's another line of veto being exercised by the Naxals on the state. And one can go on with quite a few examples to explain how they both contain each other, because of which conflict doesn't conflagrate into a Kashmir or Assam situation, or it can't go away because they're locked into this. Now, I'll turn to the second category, which is this whole idea of governmental participation. Now, in the resource deficit political economy of Jharkhand, one thing which the state has been able to do is define the categories of participation in every big sense of the term. And I mean every sense of the term because if you don't participate in that political economy, you don't survive in that area. Whether it's Naxals with the Delhi economy, whether it's a common poor with its dependence on beneficence of the state, whether state officials themselves to use bureaucratic gatekeeping to structure programs. They are obliged to participate in the political economy on terms within policy categories set by the state itself. If you can't break out of that, really, because there's no other way of participating in the political economy of the region. It could acquire many forms. It can acquire forms of participation in Panchayati Raj. Naxals has started doing that, contest elections in Panchayats. Why? Because the category of participation which state has structured for them, you can't avoid that. If you avoid that, you become politically irrelevant. So you have to be able to demonstrate your presence in the Panchayat elections to be able to stay relevant for the purpose of being able to use occasional violence for strengthening your categories of levy seeking. If you don't participate in Panchayati Raj, you'll be wiped out gradually by other parties who will participate. Right? Another example I'll give you. State says all manner of programs have to be implemented through a variety of categories. SC, ST, BPL, OBC, what have you. The categories themselves are not so important here. Now, this should normally mean, should be structuring the state only. No, it structures every actor here because three things happen. Actors then present themselves, define themselves in languages which make sense to the state. I say, I'm a poor OBC from a particular caste, and so I deserve to be able to have this benefit, that housing, that seat in the panchayat, whatever it might be. The power of this category is so important that Naxals have acquired these categories for their own organizational definitions as well. We have this peculiar situation happening in Jharkhand and Bihar. And I'm talking South Bihar, North Jharkhand here, the six districts we covered. You have class-based, ostensibly, class-based Naxal parties breaking up on caste lines. So it's very, very clear if you feel there. This particular party, that's the term which is used, is a particular caste party. The point I'm trying to make is the policy category state uses to order the social reality has far, far beyond than what it's meant for. And this category, this structures what I've called governmental participation by disciplining every actor in that field to abide by those categories. Last word here, and I can see last word here. It is not as if, I'm not trying to allude here, that as if state and the Naxals are equally balanced. What I'm saying, they're locked into each other in such a way they can't break up easily. With one difference. State retains the essential ability to redefine categories, which will then oblige everybody else, including Naxals, to start restructuring their own functioning. State's not going to do that very often for reasons which we need in the paper. Thank you.
Alright, Sanjay Kumar, Director, Center for the Study of Developing Societies.
What I am going to do in my presentation is to just track the political trajectories of Bihar and Jharkhand since Jharkhand has been created after dividing the state of Bihar. So what I do is when I'm trying to find out what is the political trajectory of these two states, there are some similarities and I also see some dissimilarities. So I would present some data in order to prove both the points that there are some similarities, and then we also find some differences when we look at the political trajectories in the two states, and also possibly try to offer some explanation why do we see these similarities and why do we see these differences in the political trajectories. What are the similarities first? Both states witnessed decline of the Congress post-Mandal period, and So that's one similarity. Both the states have sizable presence of regional party. And we know in Bihar we have RJD and JDU, but besides that there are some other parties as well. In Jharkhand we have JMM, and at times we had other smaller parties, but the one leading regional party in Jharkhand is Jharkhand Mukti Morcha, and the two leading regional parties in Bihar, RJD and JDU. Both the states have a sizable presence of BJP, but just short of having a strength based on which they are able to form a majority government, though 2014 assembly election is an exception with regard to Jharkhand, not with regard to Bihar. So these are the similarities, and also the other similarities, both the states have witnessed a increased turnout of women voters. So these are the common similarities which I find if I look at the political trajectory of the two states during last 2 decades. And when I state these points, this is just supported by the data. This is the vote share of Congress in various elections, both in Jharkhand and Bihar, and you can clearly see that the line is going down, 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 and we can see now roughly Congress is holding on just 10% votes in Jharkhand and 7% votes in Bihar. Second point which I made, sizable presence of regional party in both the states, and the data is this is for Bihar. If you look at the regional party, the 3 regional parties which I have put up the data for, RJD, JDU and LJP, roughly if we actually calculate the vote share of these 3 parties, so in several elections ever since like year 2000 till 2015, so they command roughly about 45 to 50% vote. Just to prove the point that there is a sizable presence of regional party in Bihar as well as in Jharkhand, but we also see a trend later on which I am going to mention, and this is about presence of JMM, Jharkhand Mukti Morcha, as the dominant regional party in Bihar, Jharkhand, along with other regional party, and we see the vote share of regional party JMM along with other regional parties. So another similarity that we have a sizable presence of, or an important political player in both the states, both regional party JMM in Jharkhand and RJD and JDU in Bihar. I also mentioned sizable presence of BJP in both the 2 states, but just short of having a presence enough to enable them to form the government on their own, though Jharkhand is an exception if we look at the 2014 election. And this is an indication, and also an indication that BJP is also on the rise in these 2 states. And this is the vote share of the BJP in both the states over last several elections. Another point which I mentioned, and just to support the data about women turnout, in both the states the turnout of women is on the rise, and if you look at the last 2 rows, you can clearly see that the turnout of women in 2010 assembly election was 54% compared to 51% turnout among male voters in Bihar, and if you look at the 2015 assembly election also, the women turnout was roughly 7% more compared to the men turnout, which is exceptional if we compare it with any other state in the country. But we see similar patterns in Bihar as well, that the women turnout is on the rise, and if you look at just the last row, which gives you the men and the women turnout for the 2014 assembly election, 67% women turnout and men turnout is 66. And if you actually compare it with the previous election, this is a remarkable change, because in early elections, the men turnout used to be higher compared to the women turnout. So these are the similarities. These are the 4 or 5 similarities in the political trajectories of 2 states. Now moving on to the political differences. What are the differences in the 2 states? One difference, while regional party in Bihar still holds strong, if we look at both the parties JDU and RJD, they still are commanding a strong position in Bihar. But if you look at what has happened to the regional party in Jharkhand, there is a decline in the support base of regional party in Jharkhand, which is the JNM. So this is one contrasting point that in Jharkhand, there is a systematic decline in the support base of regional party, but in Bihar, the two regional parties have been able to hold on to its support base somewhat. It may not be as high as it used to be in the 90s, but still both the parties, and they being in the government with some alliance or the other, is a proof that regional party is still holding very strong in Bihar. What explains this difference? Why do we see regional party holding strong in Bihar but not in Jharkhand? I think the difference is because in Bihar, the two regional parties have been able to hold this question of identity. So they have been able to encash this question of caste identity, while in Jharkhand, the regional party has failed in actually upholding this sense of identity, sense of belongingness to a community. JMM has not been able to hold on to their core supporters, which are the Adivasis, and we know that Adivasis are roughly 27% of the population of Jharkhand. So if we look at the core support base of the three parties, the two parties, regional parties in Bihar, and the one regional party in Jharkhand. So in Bihar, both the regional parties are still able to invoke this pride of identity based on caste. But in Jharkhand, initially that sense of identity was with the party, but over the years that sense of belonging to a community, that sense, the JMM has not been able to uphold that identity. And why do I say that? Though I have not cited the data, but over last 2 decades, it is very clear from the studies which we have conducted. And if I look at the vote share of the regional party among their core supporters, so in Bihar, Yadavs and Muslims over last several elections have voted in large number for RJD, a proof that they still commands, they still have a sizable support among these two communities. And if I just want to cite the data, roughly between 60% of the Muslims have voted for RJD over the years, and roughly 70 to 75% of Yadavs have voted for RJD in several elections. Same in the case for Kurbis and Koiris with regard to JDU. Large number of Dalits vote for Ramvilas Paswan's Lok Janshakti Party. But if we look at what has happened to the vote share of JMM or the support base of JMM amongst the Adivasi, we clearly see that there is a decline. Not even 50% of the Adivasis vote for JMM now in these elections. And a clear sign, if you look at what has happened in the 2014 Lok Sabha as well as the assembly election, only a very tiny, not even like 1 out of 4 Adivasi, which is roughly about 25-27% Adivasis have voted for JMM, and BJP has been able to make a huge inroads among the Adivasi voters. So the failure to invoke the identity question by the regional party in Jharkhand, which is JMM, and still being successful in invoking the identity question by the two regional parties in Bihar, actually has made all the difference in why still we see the regional parties in Bihar still holding strong, but we don't see the regional party of JMM, regional party in Jharkhand, which is JMM, being able to command a strong political position in Jharkhand. I think this is thank you.
All right, so we have Debdatta Saha, Assistant Professor at South Asia University.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I would actually, okay, let's start. So this is about industrial policy, comparing Bihar with Jharkhand. So in terms of definitions, what is industrial policy? So industrial policy is an area of action by the state, by the government, where a class of pecuniary as well as non-pecuniary incentives are given to entrepreneurs in a timely manner so that honest entrepreneurs take up these incentives and come in and start business in the state. The advantage for the state is it gives employment, it helps useful usage of its resources, and hopefully if it is well directed, then it also manages to minimize the total environmental harm. By its very nature, industrial policy is discriminatory because it gives the state, it puts the state in charge. It gives the state gives guidance to entrepreneurs that these are the sectors where we see a potential for growth, for development. These are the sectors which are our core competence areas. So please come in, put in your resources, and here are standing by. So it is distortionary because it directly comes into play, it affects market outcomes, it distorts prices, it subsidizes, and it also imposes sanctions. The aim is, of course, to pick winners, to which will be the one which will succeed, and there are very few horizontal interventions which can happen through industrial policy. That is, a class of actions which will help all industries and not just a selective set of few industries. So, because of its very nature, it has been a bit debated, do we need industrial policy? Does it work? And that is now known to be a bit of a moribund exercise, that it's been seen, if you use industrial policy cleverly, the experience of Japan's electronic industry with the clever usage of MITI, the Ministry of Technology in Japan in the 1980s, was one where industrial policy put the country into a growth trajectory in terms of industrial development. So the whole bunch of theoretical reasons why industrial policy is now seen as an absolute essential, particularly for states with a low industrial base like Bihar and Jharkhand. So these ones are market imperfections which give rise to arising from asymmetries of information, because of which there are brand market failures, there are financial market imperfections, there are labor market imperfections, there are input market imperfections, there are significant sub-additivities in costs because of which there are increasing returns to scale, giving rise to monopoly powers to certain firms, and therefore gives rise to some costs and barriers to entry, which can be leveled out to some extent by using 3 parts of industrial policy, which Dani Rodrik in his 2008 paper, after a lot of speculation as to whether we at all need industrial policy, comes up with. And in our paper, we investigate industrial policy along these 3 lines. The carrots and sticks part of an industrial policy, which is the incentives and sanctions part of industrial policy, the embeddedness of industrial policy. To what extent are all actors, industrialists, firms, workers, as well as policymakers, bureaucrats, all embedded within the same policy network? And the third one is accountability. The third point is very important, is not only governmental accountability. It is not only governmental commitment to stand by to certain class of policies. It is also accountability on the part of entrepreneurs. It is accountability on the part of senior or established players to help identify the state that these are the new ones who are likely to be able to deliver if you give resources to them. So this joint difficulty, but this is the best possible yardstick with which to understand industrial policy. So I just quickly go over the I picked up the industrial incentive policies, which is a subclass of the total range which constitutes industrial policy. And in Bihar, we've had 3 rounds of this industrial incentive policy. The first one is 2006-11, which I studied. The next one was 2011-16, which was there in force when we started our IGC project here on the food processing industries. Now, this is lapsed and the new policy 2016-21 is in place. Now, in total, and just for this presentation, I'm summarizing this, the details are in the paper. There has been a sharp change in policy. Between 2006, the first policy, and the second one, the government changed its course. It brought in a broader range, a much larger set of incentives. Front-loaded capital subsidies, interest subsidies, and a special focus on the food processing industry through a separate policy, 2008 food processing policy. 20% front-loaded capital subsidies for all industries, 35% front-loaded capital subsidies for food processing industries. Now this again goes in for a correction. 2016-21, the government goes back on the capital subsidies, gone. What is retained are the interest subsidies. And there is nothing now, but the targeting feature of industrial policy, that is also gone. Food processing sector is now treated at par with a number of other sectors which have been identified as priority sector by Bihar. These ones are also the same, similar ones which have been done by Jharkhand. So IT, super specialty hospitals, then tourism, as well as food processing, agri-based industries, education, have been marked out and chalked out by the Bihar government as well as the Jharkhand government as the core sectors for development. There's significant interstate competition going on, in which I'll show you. Both of them are trying to attract capital to come into the state, as well as capital within the state. We are giving this, but Bihar government has done a slight rollback on the total number of front-loaded subsidies, so the question is, did they or did they not work? Along with that, of course, there are these other institutions which have been in place. The Single Window Clearance Act, the Land Development Authority, the Udyog Mitra. Now, if you look at what has happened with Jharkhand, similarly, 3 rounds of industrial policy, 2001, 2011-16, 2016-21. Now, between 11-16 and 16-21, what has been introduced, the big difference is interest subsidies. This was absent in the second round of policies. This has been introduced in the current policy. So at present, it is Jharkhand which is trying to act in a most generous manner with both front-loaded capital subsidies, interest subsidies. Along with this, both the Bihar government and the Jharkhand government have tax and stamp duty registration fee exemptions, which are built into into the policy, with standard checks to prevent moral hazard and also to avoid the problem of reverse selection. Just as the Bihar government, there's also Single Window Clearance Act, there's a Jharkhand Investment Promotion Board, there's also a Land Development Authority. But now, I'll give you selected pieces of data to create a story as to the growth trajectory in these two states have been slightly different. So if you look at registered manufacturing, how have these two states performed? This is ASI data for 2012-13. The point is, if you look at salaries, wages, and bonuses per worker, this is much larger for Jharkhand, about 3 times that in Bihar, showing it's overall more productive than Bihar. At least the earnings per worker are much larger. And Jharkhand does much better than the all India average. Then, if you look at the gross value added, share in total value added of output, this is a measure of productivity. This is again registered manufacturing, ASI data. You will find that Jharkhand is outstripping the all India average. The latest data, Jharkhand is at the top, it's number 1. Bihar lags a lot behind in terms of productivity. This, in our study, we found is a large part of it can be explained by the small firms phenomena. Post its separation, Jharkhand left with the larger mineral-based companies, firms, industries, and with small firms, which we also found in our data, you do not have the kind of capital, you do not have the kind of investable surplus to go big and to invest in your own productivity. So now we come to, but unregistered manufacturing is not the area which is targeted by industrial policy, but through subcontracting relationships with formal sector and informal sector are deeply tied together. Anytime you have the formal sector developing, the informal sector also gets a push through formal and informal contracts. So here again, the story is very, very interesting, standing back to what we're saying. Bihar, this is again the NSX66 7th round data, which was the only large comprehensive survey of the unregistered manufacturing sector, 2010-11. The total number of firms in the unregistered manufacturing sector in Bihar is twice that in Jharkhand. Also, interestingly, they are more productive than in Jharkhand. So per farm productivity in Jharkhand for the unregistered manufacturing is higher, the opposite for registered manufacturing. But there are many more people per farm in the unregistered manufacturing in Bihar. So if you look at own account enterprises versus establishments, these are basically family-owned businesses which do not hire any external labor. Now there's a lot of disguised unemployment in this. So then we look at the gross value added per worker in unregistered manufacturing, that figure is comparable with Jharkhand. It is that you have a whole bunch of informal units working, employing a large number of people, which finally becomes per person highly unproductive. So to quickly go on with my story, but there's a larger part to this day. What about business perception? And here I took data from the World Bank Ease of Doing Business survey. And the results of these 2009 survey for city-wise is startling. Jharkhand comes with a Ranchi, has a rank of 9 out of 17 Indian cities, whereas Patna has a rank of 14. But if you look at the disaggregated factors within this, it is not so bad for Patna, actually. Starting business and for enforcing contracts, Patna has a second rank, so the second best city to start your business. But if you look at Ranchi really lags behind with a 15th and 11th rank. Where Bihar loses out is registering property and paying taxes, clearly indicating bureaucratic and governmental inefficiency, which also came up in our interviews with, these are places which there can be immediate correction. Now this divergence between the perception of doing business, how difficult is it to do business. By 2014-15, this has solidified into, if you look at the 98-point action plan, this is the World Bank report, Jharkhand has a third position among the 32 Indian states, and Bihar is ranked 21, lagging way behind. Now, what explains these various parts of data? Now, if I take, in my paper I give a lot, I just have 5 minutes left, so I'll just give you the essential story which I'm trying to build here. The story is coming from a policy network approach. So essentially, when you look at the process of industrialization here, and particularly industrial policy, this big dot in the center is the state. It's typically a star network because the state is now connected with every other actor. These can be those formal, big and large and small firms connected with the government through various connections. These can be sanctions, these can be requirements for property rights, anything that you need, or also for subsidy applications. Then there are further connections or subcontracts with the formal sector, and this is the informal sector which is connected to the formal sector through subcontracting. Now, when this kind of a network, which operates both in Jharkhand and Bihar, in any state where this is the industrial policy network, when Jharkhand and Bihar separates and you have these large industries leaving Bihar and mineral-based ones going to Jharkhand, they carry with them, they are a homogeneous set of large firms. So what we call in policy terms, cohesiveness in the network, the policy, the industrial culture which permeates through policy cohesiveness, or how much do these agents in this network share the same vision, that is much higher when you have a similar set of firms working for you. This became clear to us in our interviews during our food processing survey. Large firms are more interested in those tax and VAT exemptions than in front-loaded capital subsidies. It is the middle and the small firms who want those front-loaded capital subsidies because they are dying of a cash crunch. For firms which are trying to expand because collaterals are given against your working capital and you don't have so little of it to collateralize, these are the kind of firms that, so there is a divergence in view. It's not a very cohesive network. When you have small, medium and micro units all asking for various things from the government, you do not have a very cohesive network, nor can you send across your ideas to the government in a very cogent fashion. The other point is network embeddedness. The embeddedness part can be studied through how the depth of the network. So the point is these two combined features, the cohesiveness of the network and the interconnectedness of the network, how connected each actor is. Is there a subcontracting relationship between these two firms within this here? So this will determine the future growth trajectories, though Bihar now seems to lag behind a bit behind Jharkhand. There are certainly clear positives. One of our entrepreneurs are sitting here in the audience. We've interviewed him and he is a startling, interesting industry in Bakhana where Bihar has a clear positive advantage in terms of resources for sure. But there is the story of Comfed in Bihar, which this is a government-owned firm with a government, this can be equated to a meaty kind of Japanese state-sponsored capitalization strategy for agglomerating capital across small units, because this was clear to us. You have a 150 crore fully automated dairy plant in Nalanda, which was up to state of the world. Now, to get a 150 crore startup to start this, you need that kind of an ability to organize and get capital across through the through various actors, and that can happen in this kind of. So this is a possible strategy going ahead. Confident Bihar is already a success story. There's also the Bihar startup policy. So maybe bypass manufacturing altogether, look at the service sectors, and look at policies like the Bihar startup policy and certain other ones which I unfortunately don't have time to discuss here, but definitely the developments in the food processing sector also, where Bihar is definitely ahead of Jharkhand. The story is still not complete. Now, before I end, I have to thank a whole bunch of people, some of who are here in the audience, who helped me understand and actually adopt Bihar mentally in my state. It goes on in my mind as to what is going on with the state. So I sincerely thank all of them, to Dr. Gupta, Anjan Mukherjee, Barna Ganguly, Amrish, Prabhat for over here, and I thank ADRI for giving me this opportunity to present my work. Thank you very much.
Next, Gautam Patel, Senior Policy Manager at JUBILEE.
Namaste and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gautam Patel. I'm working with Poverty Action Lab, also known as JPAL. I first came to Bihar to look at how rural development happens through an internship with the Rural Development Department, Government of Bihar. This was 9 years ago. I'm glad to say I come more regularly to both Bihar and Jharkhand to work with the Rural Development Department. I'm excited today to see people in the room with far more experience, far more insights than I have. I'm going to be sharing what I've learned, but looking to you for your inputs, for your insights and your questions as well. So I'm going to be talking about building stable livelihoods. It's a particular program that targets the poorest of the poor. What I mean by this is women-headed households in rural parts of the country. I'm using this as a case to tell you two stories. One is about the research. So JPAL researchers have used randomized evaluations to evaluate the impact of this program, and I'd say what the results of that, the robust findings of that. The second story, also a very interesting story, is how once we have those findings, that research, that understanding of impact, and then also process, how we can work with governments to scale that up, to reach far more people. So a central part of my presentation to share with you is how we can, one, do research well, and then move from research to reach many people, to scale up into action. So as I said, the case that I'm going to be talking about, so JPAL is a network of researchers across the world. We have done randomized evaluations of over nearly 800 now. This is one particular case study to highlight this. So what we see here is a woman, as I mentioned, this is women-headed households who are targeted. The asset is goats in this particular case. It can be farm or non-farm assets. This is something we're all familiar with in the room, the sense of livelihoods being transferred. A new part of this program is mentoring. And I'm going to be talking about what I mean by mentoring across 18 months to give this type of woman the confidence, the skills to become a micro-entrepreneur and what those results look like. And this picture is from Patel in Bihar, where we have a policy pilot this particular program. As I mentioned, the second story I want to be telling, which I think is very interesting, very relevant, a story that we need to understand far more, is how we begin taking that evidence of preparation. Many of us are researchers here, many of you would have presented your results to a government. How to make that dialogue effective. Many people recognize this building, it's the Secretariat here in Patna. I don't know, I've visited many times, but this is almost the front end, the backstage of this is working with that team on the field, looking at their structures, looking at their budgets, their operations, and actively working with the government in a dialogue where research can reach far more people as well. So this is the other story I'd like to share with you all as well. And as my role, so in JPAL we do three things. We do the evaluations, we do the randomized control trials. I explained about that. I'm on the policy team where we're working actively and directly with government partnerships to make our research used. So there's the outline of what we'll be talking about today. So the first one, I'm going to be explaining what I mean by promoting evidence. What do we mean by evidence of impact? And then look at the problem. Are the poorest of the poor being reached? What government data we have on this, what understanding we have on this. Then the particular program, the targeting the ultra poor. And then I'm going to move into, as I said, that other story. How do we have the dialogue with government that makes sense? How do we make scientific evidence relevant? About the importance of process monitoring. They're not finding, impact is one thing, understanding a program is cost effective. But what about those, unless we understand processes, they cannot be operationalized in another context. How we fit this in, this whole conference is about the vision of Bihar and Jharkhand. We've had several conversations with these governments on how they design the scale up on their terms, within their constructs, within their policies. It's different with Jharkhand and Bihar, and I'll talk about that as well. And let's talk about embedding operations in government structures. So, on the high level, we might see research as a large task, but the nitty-gritty is incredibly essential to scale ups. So first of all, let me talk about what we mean by evidence-based policy making. So, JPAL, the JPAL network, what we subscribe to is a particular methodology of randomized evaluations. So in very simple terms, what we mean by that is what we use in medicine. Many of us take medicines, we have treatment, and we know they've had clinical trials where one group gets the treatment, one does not. At the start, that group is similar on average, whether it's on income, gender, etc. Those things are checked. And then over time, we track what happens to those two groups. And the reason why we do this in medicine, same reason why we can use it in social development, is to remove bias, to understand causality. So the only thing that is different for those two groups of people is the program. The monsoon is the same for them, the politics is the same for these groups of people, everything else is similar. Something is going to be disaster, it'll also be the same for that set of people. The only thing different is the interventions. That tells us about the causality of that program. So we use this methodology. This methodology, it has constraints, it applies to particular situations, it's very useful when it does, but again just putting out there that we do not use or subscribe this to every single type of evaluation, it's for particular types of problems. So just who we are so you understand, so we're a network of professors across universities, many universities, people actually here of these universities, but just to explain, this is the leaders of the research. In India itself, we do field surveys as well. So directly on the ground, we're employing something like 800 field staff are working on 40 projects as of now. And we're data-driven. We spend a lot of time on high-quality data, on fact-checks, etc. We have an office in Patna, we have these 9 offices around the country. This is just what we do before I go into the results. So the question, are the poorest of the poor being reached? And this has been touched on this conference in many ways. People have been talking about the social aspects, the political aspects, democracy, etc. I'm just going to touch on some of the data just to help us define and understand this problem. So this is just straightforward World Bank data. This is number of people living below US dollars 1.9 million. So it's 2012 data. Some of you people will be broadly familiar with this trend. So across the whole world, we're saying some 900 million are below this poverty line. For India, that's roughly a third of that. It's 273 million. So just to give you a sense of what we mean by extreme poverty here and what that means for India. Now, going a bit further, so looking at what the government does about that, so or at least a segment of that, which is this is the funds for the National Rural Livelihoods Mission. For people who aren't familiar, this is basically SHG model. So women coming in groups, they're doing regular savings, and they're building up, to build up their income and use loans. They take these micro loans. It's a credit-based model. These figures, they're huge, which is good to see. So we see big figures in rural development, and there's a problem. These figures are in crores. So for example, this is of 2,730 crores. So very large sums of money for the country. The second bar is utilization as well. Just to give you a sense, so that's the figure that's budgeted. In 9-10, it was 78%, 74, 68. Just to give you a sense that yes, there is some underutilization. Here, my only point is there is significant, substantial resource for this particular area of work. Now to another data set. So the poorest of the poor, who are they? This is from the Socio-Economic and Census data, 2011. What we see here, so that there's several indicators that the census counted, the household survey counted people. For women-headed households, there are 1.4 crore, or 14 million, women-headed households across the country. This data is available district level, block level, down to household level. Yes, it's a little outdated now, there's some issues with the data, but it definitely gives us a sense of trends. So when we're looking at this data with governments, we know which are the blocks of Bihar or which are the blocks of Jharkhand, which have the highest number of women-headed households. There's also subsets of that data. There's also women-headed households where there's no able-bodied male as well, as in further deprivation of that. But just to give you a sense of what we're talking about. So Bihar, this figures the country, 14 million. For Bihar, 13 lakh, or Jharkhand, it's 5.2 lakh. So that's 1.3 million and half a million as well. Just to give you a sense of who we're talking about. So now the other part of the other research we've done in Japan is looking at the microcredit, the loan model. So what we see is that poor people getting loans, that they are able to cope better in shocks as well, in the sense they're able to find a source of funds in their village. What we find when we talk to the government, not just from our own data, is significant numbers of women left out of that. What that means is, and I've also been on the field, there are women who can't make the 10 rupees per week saving, that they do not have that amount of money. So hence they are excluded from the SHD, the NRLM model. So one way you can think about this program I'm talking about is almost a precursor for them to get that first foot up out of extreme poverty and then access mainstream services. So now I'm going to talk to say what the model is and explain the research behind it. So the model involves participatory rural appraisal for targeting. And again, these are issues, people will be familiar with this already, that there's issues, when you look at PDS, for example, there's issues of leakage in terms of targeting. So the first part of the model is actually target well in the first place. This is pins a village on the ground, pinning down where people live to map the rural appraisal. And then there's wealth ranking that happens. This is a card system used. It's public, people are involved, it's transparent, because that woman is going to get an asset that other people won't get, as in whoever targets it will get the asset. So hence it's a transparent process, so the village itself has buy-in to look after this program, look after the outcomes. The asset can be farm or non-farm. There's also a savings encouragement here that the women that they're collecting in a small box, in a dalla, and when they get chance maybe once a month and every 2 months, they will go to the bank to deposit that in a savings book. I mentioned mentoring, so this is a part that's new and different. So for 18 months, once a week, these women are met. They're either met in a group, as in a group of 5-6 women in that village, or individually. They're taught the basics of finance. Stock registry. These women are not literate, how to sign, basic numeracy, count up what stock they have. Also, things on confidence, equally, health, education. There's a package there across those 18 months. So a bit more, so yes, as parts of this model is familiar for India, for us, and parts are different, parts are innovation. But I just wanted to give you a bit more sight in why is this important? Why is it important to have mentoring? So why do women need that? So this is a market in Bhagalpur to get the goats, to get the livelihood. And if I ask you to spot the women, it's pretty difficult, right? I mean, I could not spot another woman there in this market. So I'm just putting across here, this is not a space where women would be, and especially when you talk about this woman who's a single woman, she's got family, she's more vulnerable, usually used to, dependent on begging or agricultural domestic labor. When it comes to negotiation, you're not going to be, it's going to be tough, right? This is the first time you've come to a market and buy some goods. Have you done it before? You've not done it before. You've not handled assets. So this is where the mentoring comes. This is the need for mentoring. So that the program is highly codified, and hence it's very scalable. So codified, I mean that there's market analysis at the start, the targeting explained, the asset transfer happens in the first few months. The mentoring coaching happens throughout 18 months. The saving also kicks in, and we see that sustained. So the evidence is from 6 different randomized evaluations across the world. One was in India's Murshidabad in West Bengal. And I'm just going to give you an overview of the results. So interestingly, it's not just income that went up. We also looked at their sense of stress as well, their mental health, as well as their health, and the positive outcomes on a number of indicators. Their consumption as well, children going to school, which is great to see, but just to give the high level, it's a short presentation. So because it's an RCT, it's randomized control trial, we have the comparison group and the treatment group. So if you first just look at the pale bars, so the pale bars are women who did not get the program. So of course their life does get better, and their consumption does increase over years. This data is from 2011 to 2015. And then this is where it gets interesting. So when we have the RCT, we have the second group who are getting the program, and their life is improving by significant amounts. I mean, the improvements are large. So when they exit the program after 24 months, they're already 25% better off in consumption. So there's a complete exit from the program. 1 year later, when they've not had that mentoring, still there's a little diminishment with 20%. In the long term, we see a multiple of the improvement. What we mean by that is women do gain the business skills. This does not mean she has 5 goats and she has 50. It does not mean that. What we see is she multiplies the number of businesses. So she's gaining the types of skills. She also sells things at the local mela. She'll have a kitchen garden, and she's increased her income multiple times. We also looked at other indicators, time spent productively, consumption, that's what I showed. The perception of economic security, food security. Some of these are self-reported, some aren't. This is their passbook. Total savings also goes up. So you've got some hard indicators, some soft ones, a very strong combination. This program's working well. So now I'm just coming to the last section, which is what does this mean for Bihar and Jharkhand in terms of their vision? How does it fit in? So some of the things that we did. So what we did was we set up a policy pilot in Bahadurpur to get this program going, a demonstration site. The research I showed you, that results from Murshidabad. Bihar is different, and different parts of Bihar are different. So we set up a policy pilot to learn on the processes for that, so we can demonstrate to the government how this can embed in their systems. I'm just showing some different aspects of how we're working with the government. This is a formal collaboration. This is the Chief Minister of Jharkhand, along with with our team. We're signing a formal collaboration to work together. We apply the evidence for the scale-up. Over here is looking at how we embed this in government structures. I've been doing a number of field visits, joint field visits, with the government team as well, where we're finding out how does this learning of this program fit into the government existing resources. They already have staff there, they already have resources. We do not want to duplicate, nor can we, but how do we integrate and how do they own this and shape this? And so in sum, what I wanted to tell you about, I wanted to tell you the story of what we mean by rigorous research, how do we get down to causality, but when we have robust findings, then what do we do with that? And then what JPL exists for is translating evidence to action, to large scale. That's what we want to happen, especially with problems that are seen as intractable, like extreme poverty. The parts I want to share with you is how do we make that evidence relevant to a government in terms of their own policy issues and how it fits in with what they can operate. Locally grounded is that having sites and working deeply in the ground on the nitty-gritty is something that our team has been doing with our partners. This program I mentioned was first implemented by Bandhan Onagar in Murshidabad. And how the government designs and owns that scale-up design that fits with them. Let us get into nitty-gritty and embedding operations in government structures. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
And last, Amit, Assistant Professor at ADRI University.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank ADRI to give me this opportunity to present my work in front of scholars whose work has informed my own understanding of Bihar and Jharkhand. What I'm going to talk about today is begin with arguing that in the 21st century we have seen dichotomous development experience in Bihar and Jharkhand. And from there, I will go and argue that what is needed to understand these dichotomies of developmental experience is to operate with a new discursive assemblage that has emerged in the development discourse that, of conflict, security, and governance that allows us to clear some of the issues and challenges that we have in understanding the kind of development experience that Bihar and Jharkhand are having. To begin with, I would like to point out that the state of Bihar, inclusive of Jharkhand in the 1990s, was the slowest growing state in any decade in independent India. However, over the course of the 21st century, the two states separately have gone on to become the fastest, have grown either faster than or as fast as the Indian growth rate of over 7% in general. However, this fast economic growth rate hasn't necessarily translated as was presumed to be. So they are the fastest growing states, but are right at the bottom of Human Development Index. There has been an increase in agricultural inputs and in terms of chemical and technical inputs. However, agriculture as such has stagnated. There is, in case of Jharkhand, there has been a decline in the share of the manufacturing sector, so to speak, especially in the registered one. And that has been at the expense of the service sector, where the service sector has gone on to increase from 32.9% of the GDP to 47.2% of the GDP between 2004 and 2014. And industry has declined from 52% of the GDP approximately to 36% of the GDP. At the same time, the two states present very different kinds of governmental setups, whereby what you see is Bihar has had stable governments for the last 5 terms and has had Panchayati Raj since separation. On the other hand, Jharkhand has had over 13 governments in the last 15 years and has recently started with the Panchayati Raj experience in 2011. At the same time, what is it that I mean by this new discursive assemblage of conflict, security, and governance? I would like to elaborate it a little bit. The argument goes that conflict is being seen as the cause and consequence of underdevelopment, which can be pursued through a very developmentalized notion of security, which argues that security and development are constitutive preconditions for each other, which can be pursued through a neoliberal understanding of governance or a technical understanding of governance, which tries to pursue market-based solutions for collective action. However, I make a shift from this neoliberal understanding of conflict, security, and governance and try to have a more politicized understanding of these concepts. Now, what exactly is it that I mean by a politicized understanding? I would like to elaborate that a little bit. So what I'm basically saying is that the neoliberal understanding of conflict and violent conflict in particular tries to understand it for its instrumental rationality in terms of material constraints, where violence is either seen as a means to pursue the greed of the elite or redress the grievance of the poor. However, there is a need to not just account for the instrumental rationality of violence, but also understand its communicative rationality and how it is being used as a medium of communication through fear and as a means of accumulation. Similarly, when we are looking at security, it is not just a developmentalized, depoliticized notion whereby it ignores systemic oppression and sees security in terms of being included into the benefits of development. What we are looking at in terms of security is a shift from a geopolitical understanding of security that targets territory to a biopolitical understanding of security with population as its primary target. Similarly, when we're looking at governance, it's not merely a technocratic technical understanding of finding market-based solutions for problems of collective action, but a larger historical process of democratization of knowledge, institutions, and practices. Based on these understandings, I am trying to make some arguments about how, in order to explain these dichotomies of development experience of Bihar and Jharkhand, we need to understand how conflict has been used for its communicative rationality, how the security that is being pursued cannot only be seen in terms of number of violent incidents and deaths therein and the decline as such, and governance in terms of democratization that has happened. Now, seeing the findings that I'm presenting here are part of a fieldwork that I did for my PhD between 2010 and 2013. I submitted my PhD on conflict and the democratic state in Bihar and Jharkhand in 2015, and this comes from there. Now, the government, on its part, has restarted looking at Naxalism for the first time in 2003-4 all over again, and the primary way in which the state looked at Naxal conflict and conflicts of Northeast and Kashmir as well was to describe it in terms of number of violent incidents and the deaths that were. As in case of Naxalism, they also described what was called degree of affectedness of districts. Now, the reason for choosing Bihar and Jharkhand was that more than approximately 50% of the worst affected Naxal districts happened to be in Bihar and Jharkhand. That's 16 out of 33 worst Naxal affected districts were in Bihar and Jharkhand. However, there is a shift from Naxalism being a major factor in Bihar since the late 1960s all the way, and not so much in Jharkhand, to an increasing dominance of Naxalism in Jharkhand. So 6 of these 16 districts come from Bihar now, and 10 of them are in Jharkhand. Elaborating a little further and trying to look at the way in which the violence is not just being used for its instrumental rationality, but also for its communicative rationality in order to control what I call the informal economy of levies and bribes and commission. Now, over the last 2 decades, if you look at the history of Naxalism in the region, the first 1990s is the history where you have conflicts between the Maoist Communist Center and the party Unity. Their unification in 2004 that happened to be in Chatra on the borders of Bihar and Jharkhand. And from there, what we see post 2006 is an increasing split within the Maoist circles along caste lines. So MCC becomes dominated by Yadavs, from which there's an increasing amount of leadership and appropriation of levies and land that was accumulated by the Maoists by Yadavs, and the number of deaths of Ganjus per se started increasing within the Naxal fold, which led to the split between the CPI Maoist at that point of time and what is today known as Tirte Prastuti Committee, or TPC, dominated by Ganjus, and RCC, or Revolutionary Communist Center, which is dominated by Koiris and Gurmis. I studied districts in South Bihar and North Jharkhand, so Gaya, Chatra, and Hazaribagh are the districts where I'm telling this story from. What you see is an increasing turf war between these various Naxal factions over issues of levy. And what this has done is not only allowed developmental funds to come in, but also be sustained by it. Now, the story that also goes along with this shift or transitions of Naxalism in the region has to do with demobilization of the Dalits within the Naxal outfit. We have seen that with the incorporation of the OBCs since the late 1980s, there has been a varying level of participation of the Dalits in the Maoist movement. On the other hand, it has also been argued that the Maoists did not, so to speak, capacitate the Dalits in order to take over their own leadership roles. On the other hand, we see what is called, has been referred to by scholars like Ikshita Basu as the de-radicalization of Jharkhand movement, whereby there was a certain disciplining of the recognition politics in the land. Reservation, so to speak, normalized the governmental discourse on reservation and tribal discourse. There was a rise of Hindu nationalism on the ground of Sarna, and it had a serious impact on the kind of Christian vanguardism that was seen among the tribals. And finally, there is this promotion of a universal identity of the state of Jharkhand, which necessitates a universal socio-economic development policy in the region. This shift from Bihar to Jharkhand was not just because there was an increased political projection of the statist power in the region of Bihar. It also had to do with tactical advantages that the hilly and forested regions of Jharkhand gives to the Naxals in the region. It also had to do with the fact that because of political instability, the alliances that they could form with various political parties in Jharkhand allowed them far more political space than they had in case of Jharkhand. In case of Bihar, I'm sorry. Now, in order to understand what do I mean by the communicative rationality of conflict in this region, there are a few cases that I would like to discuss a little more. First is how CPI Maoist, despite its unification, was still being referred to as MCC in the region, because MCC carried that weight of fear. It carried the weight of fear where if a legislator comes from MCC, it carries far more weight than it coming from CPI Maoist. On the other hand, because of these splits that have happened within the Naxal faction, there is an increasing fear among the Naxals of, so to speak, suspected police informers, and increasingly, most of the Janadalats that are happening are around and over these, so to speak, suspected police informers. Finally, there is a certain amount of fear that exists among the police as well. So people will inform you that if we call or inform the police about Naxal movements in the night, okay, if we are informing the police about Naxal activities in the night, they would not come at that point of time. They will wait for the CRPF to come in before they come into the region. Okay, I've been given 5 minutes notice. I was also trying to look at how these conflicts are not just conflicts as such, but innovative political projects that allow the Naxals to perform a whole range of statist functions and become a part of the market of protection that exists in the state of Jharkhand. Going back, coming to issues of security and how the state has looked at it, the primary understanding of the state when it comes to issues of security is that this kind of Naxalism is not just a law and order problem, but it also involves serious issues of underdevelopment. And therefore, the response has been well-trained, well-equipped police force and pumping of development funds in this region. However, and on top of that, the police have also been using what are called Gram Suraksha Samiti and PPC, JPC factions against the MCC. What we need to also highlight here is the sheer lack of coordination between the local police and CRPF and between the police and the forest department, who somehow don't talk to each other on issues of Naxalism. Finally, there is a serious limit in terms of the current response of the state in terms of improving equipment in order to provide everyday security to the people living in the region. Finally, coming to the issue of governance and seeing it as a historical process of democratization, the state have experienced different trajectories in terms of political stability and instability, decentralization of power. However, what we see is that the category of Naxal-affected district has become a tool in the hand of the state, where being categorized as a Naxal-affected state allows local states to wash off all responsibilities and accountability of developmental failure in the region. It also sees how, like Professor Prakash pointed out right in the beginning, how Naxals have started engaging with and involving in the PRI elections themselves, controlling it through various mechanisms of control, and we see what I refer to as proxy participation of women, where they are participating through what are known as Pramukpatis and Mukhyapatis in the region, or their respective husbands. Finally, in this region, both for the Panchayati Raj and the Naxal, dispute settlement has become the primary way of legitimizing their presence in the region. Therefore, any future path of development in the region has to account for this communicative rationality of violence, that is fear, in the informal economies of levy and bribe, and has to understand the cunningness that the shadow state employs in terms of shifting responsibilities vis-a-vis developmental failure, in order to pursue a biopolitical security of everyday life for the people in the region. Thank you.
All right, so fascinating collection of papers, I think spanning a pretty wide range of issues. The Maoist movement, industrial policy, political trajectories of party politics, livelihoods. So we don't have much time, so I'm just going to very quickly ask a few questions and then immediately open it up and then maybe take all the questions together. And that's probably the best way. So starting with, I think both of yours, Amit and Imran, are similar, so I'm going to have similarities, so I'm going to kind of ask the same questions. But in terms of this, I thought it was fascinating, this kind of idea of these categories of security and development and how they're deployed and how then the entire conflict gets walked into this, these categories. And but it's fairly abstract. Some of the actual content I think came out of your papers, so thinking them together I thought was productive. But in kind of systematically comparing the experience of Bihar and Jharkhand, I mean, just if there's time to do that, and also then the shift in Bihar, I mean, from Lalu to Nehru, I think the way that Naxalism was dealt with changed pretty dramatically. There also seemed to be a kind of shift from struggles over land between like landless laborers and landlords to Adivasi kind of struggles over land and extraction. So if you could talk a little bit about that. So Sanjay, I thought it was quite fascinating. I thought it was to me the interesting thing is how Bihar has managed to kind of maintain these regional parties in Bihar, RJD and the JDU, have managed to retain their kind of core base of past support. And so it's just that question, because especially after UP, I think this is a kind of question that has like huge implications for the whole political future of India. And Debdatta, in terms of industrial policy, not at all my field. I'm just wondering how these key variables of network embeddedness and cohesiveness, how can those be separated from everything else? Because it seemed with bifurcation, the entire mineral and industrial base kind of shifts to Jharkhand. And so how do you separate that from this larger kind of story? So, and Gautam, so I just want if you talk a little more about the process monitoring, because I think RCTs are great in terms of establishing causality, but they're often not very good at understanding the processes that lead to this, which are then one of the reasons why it's difficult to scale up a lot of the experiments. So if you could talk a little bit about that. But let's just open up right now because we have limited time. So.
Yes, thank you. My name is Alan Lever. I'm involved in an NGO called Action Village India, which has been working with rural development projects in Bihar and Jharkhand for the last 30 years. I wanted to ask Gautam, I don't know whether he really meant what he said when he talked about clinical trials. I mean, I know what a clinical trial is from personal experience, but the very word clinical implies that you're acting within a very confined and regulated space. I don't know how you do that when you're trying to compare villages and women, their households, because the variables that you're concerned with when you're trying to work in that environment are far more complicated and I think almost impossible to verify in terms of a trial basis. And so that was one question, how do you manage that? Because you can't isolate people in the way that you can in a clinical trial. The second point was, why choose 18 months as a monitoring period? Because that seems to be a rather arbitrary figure when you're talking about development issues. Because the variables, again, seem to mitigate, in my view, against a set period, so that you can somehow scientifically prove that within 18 months X happened, because it just ain't like that in reality. So I had those two areas to come.
So I have two basic questions. First, particularly in relation to Bihar and Jharkhand, why conflict is always related to nationalism. I can't understand when we are talking about the conflict is we think about only nationalism. Conflict in other places also. Conflict, the range of conflict is much wider, and that is why we are concentrating on nationalism. And governance is not related to only the nationalism. Please elaborate this. Second question from the Sanjay. What are the causes, the emergence of BJP in Jharkhand, particularly in the Adivasis areas? It is not the Sarna and the Christianity. It is not the JMM is based only of the Santhalis and other Urao, Mundas has no political ideas. Please elaborate that.
So should we just have some answers, just because we're running quite low on time, and hopefully we can get another round. So you want
the two questions seems to be related in a sense. First question is about why do we see the regional parties still holding strong in Bihar? I think the only reason is that they have still been successful in invoking this whole idea of identity of caste, and also successfully giving a sense to the people of their own core supporters that they have some kind of a share in political power. It may not be a material, it may not be a substantial share, but a sense that this is their own government, and still people are able to buy this argument. We know that there are dangers. We have seen this happening in other states. So when the next election comes, there would be a danger of still these parties being able to invoke this identity or not. But up till now, last 20 years, 25 years, they have been able to do that successfully. And that's the reason why they are still holding on to power and a sizable support base in Bihar. The emergence of BJP, primarily it is a failure of, first is I think a badly fragmented political situation in Jharkhand. Look at the number of political parties in Jharkhand. JMM got split into 2-3 parties at one point of time. You have JDU, you have RJD. These are all small parties, but small parties with 7-8%, 9% votes. Congress is there. So in any state, look at the political map of all the states. In any state, if the politics is very, very fragmented, it gives a chance for BJP to rise. It happened in Maharashtra after the split. It happened in Haryana. So in any state, if BJP is against multiple parties, the chances of BJP's rise is higher compared to other states. So that's one reason. The other reason you already mentioned, that JMM, earlier they used to claim that this is the party of the tribals, but finally it didn't turn out to be the party of the tribals because they were not able to cater to even the identities of various tribal groups within the broad category called ST. And that's the reason for rise of BJP in Jharkhand.
You had a question for me, right? So I'll just answer that. There's an innate tension between cohesiveness and interconnectedness. So the same graph, which has both of them, so the center is the state, and suppose we have 4 of the nation, so 4 firms are connected. Now each of these 4 firms are of the same line of business, so essentially same cost structure. They are more cohesive, so they share the same values in the same graph. Whereas the same graph, you have 4 connections, same interconnectedness. But one is very large, one is tiny, one is just about to start, one is about to close. They will not have the same set of shared values, though both of them have the same interconnectedness. So it is easy to use graph theoretic measures to plot out these graphs and to study these graphs and to understand the nature, because I think the answer lies there. Whether you have those values being shared with the same level of interconnectedness, or whether you can improve the graph by increasing the total number of interconnectedness within the graph with more subcontracts, with more firms coming in. So that is essentially the part of the work that I am trying to attempt.
Thank you. I'll just do a very quick kind of explanation of the 2 questions raised and answered. I don't think claim is being made by me or Kumar or the matter that conflict is about nationalism. Nationalism becomes a very useful proxy for being able to capture a variety of conflicts especially vis-a-vis the role of the state in those conflicts. Because if you take document to the complete end, for which I would ask Jeffrey for another 15 minutes, which he won't give me, so we can't go there. This whole conflict which I described for nationalism actually ends up in the conflict over what I have called in my writings, recognition, redistribution, and representation. Those capture a wide variety of conflicts in Jharkhand and Bihar, which interface with the whole idea of would they erupt into violence, and if yes, how violence uses a category. The proxy taking is not necessary. You take us first as a proxy, it doesn't matter. We end up the same end of story as a complex reality. The question I was trying to address was not whether conflict is this that, but how does conflict interface with states' role in that conflict? This question I was addressing. Second question about land and so on and so forth. Absolutely. Naxals have been able to tap into those problems. Debdatta has this whole a very vibrant Naxal movement interfacing with this whole question about Chal Jal Jameen. And one can go on describing district by district because that is not a variable which is uniform. That changes from district to district, case to case, and requires different forms. I think that should suffice for now. Thank you.
I'll take the issue of land first. And yes, very true. There is this argument about issue of land being very important, especially, and it takes two different forms in Bihar and Jharkhand. While Bihar deals with the issue of landlessness, Jharkhand has the issue of land alienation dominating land politics. But increasingly, that's not the basis on which wars are being fought. The levy economy or so to speak, bribes and commissions that are coming have to do more with developmental funds and the kind of developmental funds being pumped in the region and how it gets distributed across various actors with violent means rather than anything else. Coming to the issue of why Naxalism, actually I had an entire write-up on the story of political violence and electoral violence in the age of Sri Krishna. After that, the land conflicts of 1967 with Naxalism emerging, caste senas, a very different kind of conflict in Jharkhand, which was over forcible harvesting and tree felling. But I had 12 minutes. I actually have 4 pages on it written right here, and I really would have liked to explore those sites and so historical trajectories of how Naxalism has become the focus area of policy and governance in terms of conflict. So I completely agree that the sheer diversity of conflict in this region is very high, and I would like to refer to one small point. In 1990, Y.B. Chauhan was sent a letter by Lalu Yadav who described everything from the conflict in Nepal border to the decline of feudal lords and conflicts against them, to the tribal conflict in Jharkhand, to the caste senas and everything. And then I completely agree on that. And why is it that Naxalism becomes the proxy, but it just does.
So thank you for some of your much needed question in terms of more clarity and explanation. So the first question I'll take on, so randomized evaluations in the social sector are not like in medicine. You quite rightly pointed out that you cannot have a lab nor be wanting 10 lab or 1 lab, nor would it be possible. What I was just linking to was in medicine in the field, RCTs have been used way back for 150 years, right from Louis Pasteur's time, just as it's a method that of causality. In the social sector, it's very different by design. So one, we have to look at the sample, we have to do many pre-studies. For the types of effects we expect to see or not see, we have to look at the right sample size to pick up that. So there's a number, and I can talk about into some of the details of this, but there's many things that have to be thought through. Right? They're very different from the medicine sector. I was just making the link, so this would be for people to understand. The second point, the 18 months. So the 18 months wasn't the study. The 18 months was the amount of time for the mentoring, the weekly connects with these women to build up those competencies. So this particular program was first developed by BRAC, so it has a long history of development iterations itself, the program design itself. In Bangladesh, I think it was something like 20 years back when they first began figuring out these components. How long should it? Should it be 18 months? Should it be 20? Should it be 30? Not just BRAC, other people have iterated on this around the world. So the 18 months is for the mentoring. In terms of the study, you're right, and I think where your question is coming from is when is the right time to look at your measurement, etc. This particular study, we looked at it as we exit from the program. That's year 0, 1 year later after the exit, and 5.5 years later. In a sense, we are looking at long term. In a sense, with this particular program, we're all very surprised by the findings, the very strong impacts, as I said, both mental stress, mental health, or well-being, as well as income consumption. So that's why a reason to follow up long term for that. So you're right that there is a need for long-term surveying. The last question on process monitoring. So absolutely. So if we have clarity on impact, various impact, and you saw, as I said, the results are surprising not just because they're high, but because they're sustained for a long amount of time, which we do not see with all types of problems like this. But that's not enough. It's nowhere near enough, especially if we want to look to scale up in different contexts. And that's why, for example, we ran the policy pilot in Bihar where we had continuous looking at those nuances as well in terms of how do that particular communities look at that. There's lots of things like, for example, setting an organization setting up a branch that can also have issues, it can have backfire in the community. That's important to know about when you're scaling up. Where are the bottlenecks, where are the clogs in the process? What type of management systems are required? How to tighten that? What's the operational data, not just the evaluation data? Operational data, checking on are the women progressing. There's been many times when, for example, assets die, we don't handle them so well, the vet's not there. But if you don't have that information live, you cannot quickly solve that midway as well. So that's absolutely important. That's why we've been looking for a program like this to have very strong process monitoring.
We are over time, unfortunately. But I think maybe some people can stay and continue the conversation informally.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a 10-minute break now, and I think much needed chai after this session. And then there's another Silver Jubilee lecture in the Chopra Hall. This by the Pankar group. So that is what's coming next. All right, thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes,